The courtroom fell silent as the gavel came down, its sharp crack slicing through the tension. "Case dismissed," Judge Harrison declared, his voice cutting through the room. Isabella Marconi stood calmly at the defense table, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips. Across the room, Detective Davis's fists clenched, disbelief flooding his mind. This was supposed to be the moment. The case had been months in the making, but it all unraveled in seconds. "Your Honor, you can't." "Be serious," Davis protested, frustration and anger bubbling to the surface. Judge Harrison turned to him with cold eyes. "The prosecution's case is circumstantial at best. No direct evidence links the defendant to any criminal activity. Case dismissed." Isabella gathered her things, unfazed, and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. But as she passed Davis, their eyes met for the briefest of moments, and in that instant something shifted. It was as if she knew something he didn't, something that was about to unravel. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more thrilling twists. Want to know how all of this happened? Let's dive deeper into the game. The courtroom was still as a tomb after Judge Harrison's gavel fell. The sound of it echoed sharp and unforgiving, sending a shudder through the gallery. Isabella Marconi didn't flinch. Her gaze never wavered from the judge as she sat upright, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She gave nothing away, her composure flawless, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in Detective Davis's mind. His eyes were fixed on her, burning with frustration, disbelief. "Case dismissed." Judge Harrison's voice was low and final, the words hanging in the air, pregnant with the weight of the moment. Isabella's eyes remained steady, unfazed. She had known it was coming. She'd orchestrated every move leading up to this point. The dismissal wasn't a surprise. It was the outcome she had expected. Across the room, Davis's fists clenched, knuckles turning white. His body was coiled, with tension as if every muscle was ready to spring into action. He had been fighting for this moment for years, fighting against the Marconi empire, and now here he was, powerless as the case he had poured his blood, sweat, and tears into crumbled before his eyes. He had spent months building a case against Isabella, piecing together surveillance footage, wiretaps, witness testimonies, everything he thought would bring her down. But it had been for nothing. "Your Honor, you can't be serious." Davis's voice rang out, louder than he intended, raw with frustration. His words sliced through the stillness of the courtroom, his outburst a jagged edge against the polished air of the trial. Judge Harrison's gaze flicked to him, irritation flashing across his face. "I've heard enough, Detective." The judge's voice, cold and impersonal, carried an authority that left no room for argument. "The prosecution's case is circumstantial at best. No direct evidence links the defendant to any criminal activity. Case dismissed." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. On the defense side, Isabella remained untouched by the moment. Her lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it wasn't the victorious grin of someone who had won. It was something far deeper, a subtle acknowledgement of the game she had just played to perfection. The kind of smile that only someone who had already known the outcome could wear. Isabella stood slowly, her movements deliberate, as she adjusted her tailored blazer. She wasn't in a rush. The cameras snapped, the eyes of the court all trained on her, but it didn't matter. She moved through the room with the ease of someone who had always been the center of attention, and this moment, this victory, was no different. As she gathered her things, her hand brushing across the papers on the defense table, she sensed the eyes of the room on her, but none more intense than Davis's. His gaze was like a laser fixed on her with a fervor that, for a brief moment, made her wonder what exactly he thought he saw in her. She had never doubted her abilities to control a situation, but Detective Davis had been an enigma from the start. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't intimidated by her, and that alone had made him dangerous. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Even the faintest noise, the shuffle of a paper, the creak of a chair, seemed amplified in the stillness. Isabella made her way toward the door, her heels clicking against the marble floor with a rhythmic precision, each step deliberate and controlled, as though she had all the time in the world. And perhaps, she thought to herself, she did. But Davis wasn't ready to let this go. Not yet. Not while he still had breath in his lungs. He moved quickly, cutting across the courtroom floor toward her, his steps purposeful and quick. He had to confront her, make her feel the weight of the evidence against her, make her see that the walls were closing in. But as Isabella passed by the judge's bench, their eyes locked, just for a fraction of a second. In that brief moment, something flickered in her gaze, a glint of recognition. It hit Davis like a punch to the gut, she knows. Her eyes were cool, measured, and for the first time in months of pursuing this case, Davis felt a shiver of doubt slither through him. He had been so certain, so sure of his role in bringing down the Marconi family. And yet, in this one look, Isabella had turned the tables. Davis's mind raced. How could she have known? Had he been that predictable? The look in her eyes had been too knowing, too aware, as though she had seen every move he'd made long before he had even considered it. She had been playing him every step of the way. But how? He opened his mouth to speak, to confront her, about the case, about the web of lies she had spun. But before the words could leave his lips, Isabella had already turned and slipped out through the door, vanishing into the hallway beyond. Davis stood there, frozen for a moment. His breath came in short, quick bursts as his heart pounded in his chest. He had never been one to back down, but now standing in the midst of a courtroom that had just watched its case fall apart, he felt the tide of his career shift. The storm inside Davis had only just begun. He knew, in the pit of his stomach, that something wasn't right. Everything had been too neat, too perfect. Isabella Marconi was no mere pawn in the game of crime that her father had orchestrated. No, she was the one who had been pulling the strings all along, and now Detective Davis had to figure out just how deep that manipulation went. The murmurs in the courtroom had begun to swell, the sound growing louder as the reality of the dismissal set in. But in that moment, as the last of the whispers faded into the distance, one thought echoed relentlessly in Davis's mind. He had just lost the most important case of his career, and he had no idea how to even begin to make sense of it. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with the fading echoes of the trial's aftermath. Detective Davis stood motionless, his body rigid with disbelief. The case that had consumed his every waking hour, the case that he had believed would finally bring down the Marconi crime syndicate, was over. Dismissed, just like that. He could still hear the judge's voice, cold and final, in the courtroom. Case dismissed. The words reverberated through his mind, their meaning slipping through his fingers like sand. Davis watched as Isabella Marconi exited the courthouse, her heels tapping in rhythm with his racing heart. She walked with the grace of someone who had already won, the world at her feet. Her smile, barely a curve of the lips, had told him everything he needed to know. She knew the game, and she was playing it better than anyone else in the room. She knows, Davis thought again, the realization sharp as a knife. He had never expected her to be so composed. Every step she took, every glance she made, it was all a calculated move, as if she had already foreseen this outcome long before he'd even entered the courtroom. His fingers clenched into fists, his nails biting into his palms. How had she done it? How had she manipulated everything? The evidence had been solid. At least, it had seemed that way. There had been wiretaps, testimony from informants, the surveillance footage that had clearly shown Isabella interacting with known members of her father's criminal operations. And yet, it had all amounted to nothing. Davis turned sharply, heading toward the exit, his thoughts a whirlwind. He needed to get back to his office, back to his notes, his files, his connections. There had to be something he was missing. He couldn't let it end like this. Not after everything. Not after losing so much. He had spent years working on bringing down Carmine Marconi, and Isabella was the last piece of the puzzle. If she was involved, and he was certain she was, then this dismissal was just the beginning. He refused to believe the case was lost. Isabella's car idled outside, the engine purring in quiet satisfaction. She glanced in the rearview mirror, her eyes locking with her own reflection for a moment. Her expression was unreadable, but beneath the calm surface there was a flicker of something. Satisfaction, yes, but more than that. This was the culmination of years of strategy, years of careful planning. The courtroom, with its theatrics and grand gestures, had been nothing more than another stage. And she had played her role perfectly. She had known from the start that Davis was obsessed with bringing down her family, especially her father. She had seen the detective's persistence firsthand, had watched him grow more desperate with each failed attempt to catch her father in any meaningful way. She had always been aware of his scrutiny, but she had never let it faze her. Isabella Marconi had been groomed for this life. Her father's world was her world, and it was a world where power, influence, and knowledge were the only currencies. That mattered. Growing up under Carmine's watchful eye, Isabella had learned early on how to navigate the delicate balance of appearances and control. Her father had taught her that in his world, loyalty and trust were everything, but so was the ability to remain one step ahead of everyone else. Manipulation, he called it, and if you know how to use it, it's the most powerful tool you'll ever have. She had learned his lessons well, perhaps better than he realized. Isabella glanced out the window, her gaze sweeping over the street. She could still feel the weight of Davis's eyes on her, burning with frustration. She could sense the storm brewing in his mind, the confusion, the anger. He had believed, like everyone else, that she was merely her father's daughter, a pawn in the grand game of crime and retribution. But that was the mistake he had made. Davis didn't realize it yet, but he had just walked right into her trap. Back at his office, Davis sat at his desk, surrounded by files, evidence logs, and case notes. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling in his chest. The walls of the small, cluttered space seemed to close in on him as his eyes scanned the room, his mind trying to piece together what had gone wrong. He knew Isabella Marconi was guilty. That was the only conclusion that made sense, but the case had fallen apart under his hands like paper in a storm. He slammed a file shut, the sound sharp in the silence. What did I miss? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts, and Davis looked up to see his partner, Angela, standing in the doorway. Her eyes were sympathetic, but her gaze was focused, professional. "You okay?" she asked, stepping inside. Davis let out a long breath. "I'm fine, I don't know, Angela." "Something's wrong, that case. I've been working on it for months. We had everything, every piece of evidence, every connection. It was solid." Angela crossed the room, sitting down on the edge of the desk. "Davis, you've been chasing Carmine Marconi for years. You know how this goes. Every time we think we've got him, he slips away, and now his daughter. She's smart. She's been trained her whole life to cover her tracks. You saw the way she acted in court." Davis leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Yeah, I saw it. She's good. Too good. But there's something I'm missing. Isabella is involved. I know it. I just can't figure out how." Angela hesitated, then spoke slowly as if testing the waters. "What if it's not just about her being involved? What if she's more than just a pawn in her father's game? What if she's the one pulling the strings?" Davis's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" Angela looked at him steadily. "Maybe she's the one who's been controlling everything. Maybe it's not Carmine we should be after. Maybe it's Isabella. She's been in this from the beginning. And now she's got you thinking she's just some innocent bystander." The words hit Davis like a jolt of electricity. He froze, his mind suddenly racing. Could it be? Could Isabella have been the mastermind all along, the one who had orchestrated everything, hiding in plain sight? He stared at the files spread out on his desk, suddenly seeing them in a new light. If he was going to bring her down, he would have to play the game differently. He would have to outsmart her, something he hadn't even realized was possible until now. Isabella Marconi wasn't just the daughter of a crime lord. She was the architect of the empire, and Davis had just walked into her trap. The hours dragged on in Davis's office. The sound of the clock ticking was the only noise that filled the otherwise silent room. His mind raced as he sifted through the files on his desk, his thoughts bouncing between fragments of evidence and conversations he had overlooked. Angela's words echoed in his mind. What if Isabella's the one pulling the strings? He couldn't let go of that idea. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Isabella Marconi wasn't just the daughter of Carmine Marconi, the infamous crime lord who had slipped through their fingers time and again. No, she had been the one in control all along. It wasn't just her upbringing. the polished, calm exterior she wore in the courtroom. It was how she moved in and out of situations, always a step ahead. She had been playing everyone, including him. The way she had handled the case, the way she had manipulated every legal loophole, the way she made sure the key pieces of evidence never held up in court. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of it pressing down on him. How did I miss it? The realization was like a punch to the gut. All this time, he had been chasing after the wrong person, too focused on Carmine, too blind to see that his real target was right under his nose. His phone buzzed on the desk, the screen lighting up with Angela's name. He picked it up, knocked, bothering to glance at the caller ID before answering. "Davis, you need to meet me." Angela's voice was urgent, her tone clipped. "I've got something." His pulse quickened. "What is it?" "I've been digging into Isabella's background. Something doesn't add up. I think I've found our missing link." Davis stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Where?" "The old warehouse district near the docks. I need you to come down here. It's something you'll want to see." The drive to the warehouse district felt like it took forever. The familiar sights of the city passed by in a blur as Davis gripped the steering wheel, his mind swirling with possibilities. Isabella Marconi was the mastermind. She had orchestrated everything, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. But, why? What was her endgame? The Marconi empire was vast. Her father, Carmine, had built it from the ground up using corruption, intimidation, and brute force. But if Isabella had truly been the one in control, if she had been running the show all along, what was her vision? The question gnawed at him. He had spent years believing the empire was built on the foundation of Carmine's power, but what if it wasn't? What if Carmine had been a puppet in his own organization, manipulated by his own daughter? When Davis arrived at the warehouse district, the sprawling, decaying buildings loomed over him like ghosts of a past long buried. He pulled into a parking spot near the back of one of the warehouses, the dim light of the street lamps casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Angela was waiting by the entrance, her figure barely visible in the gloom. She stepped forward as Davis approached, her face tense, a look of urgency in her eyes. "Davis," she said quietly, glancing around before speaking. "Follow me. This is bigger than we thought." Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with dust, and the smell of mildew hung in the corners. It was a place long forgotten, filled with crates and boxes stacked high, the remnants of a bygone era. Angela led him through the maze of debris, stopping in front of a hidden door tucked away behind a stack of crates. She unlocked it with a key, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Davis hesitated for a moment before following her, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling with unease. As they descended, the sound of their footsteps echoed in the narrow passageway, the air growing colder the further they went. At the bottom of the stairs, Angela turned on a flashlight, casting a beam of light across the room. It was a small, forgotten office, cluttered with old files and papers. But in the center of the room, illuminated by the flickering light, was a large map pinned to the wall. The map was covered in markings, dots, lines, and notes that crisscrossed every inch. Of it, Davis took a step forward, his eyes scanning the map. It was a detailed layout of the city, the connections between various criminal organizations, businesses, and locations that were critical to the Marconi Empire. But there was something more. There were red markings, points on the map, and they were all linked to Isabella. "What is this?" Davis asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Angela stepped closer, pointing at the map. "This is her blueprint. Isabella has been orchestrating this entire operation from the shadows. All these locations are tied to her. Businesses, warehouses, even certain politicians and law enforcement officials. She's been running the show, pulling the strings, moving people and resources wherever she wants." Davis felt the weight of the discovery settle in his chest. "This is unbelievable. She's been using her father as a figurehead, a shield to protect her while she built the empire." Angela nodded grimly. "Exactly. Carmine Marconi may have been the face, but Isabella has been the one in control. This whole time." Davis's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle finally starting to fall into place. Isabella Marconi was more dangerous than anyone had realized. Not only had she outsmarted everyone, but she had done it from the shadows, operating beneath the radar with Carmine as her puppet. "What now?" he asked, his voice hardening with determination. Angela's eyes met his. "Now we bring her down. But this won't be easy. She's got resources, people in every corner of this city. We'll need more than just a case. We'll need to outsmart her at her own game." Davis nodded, a grim resolve settling over him. He had underestimated her once before, but he wouldn't make that mistake again. Isabella Marconi was no longer just the daughter of a crime lord. She was the mastermind, the true architect behind the Marconi empire, and now it was time to take her down. The weight of the discovery in the warehouse hung heavy in Davis's mind. He sat at his desk late that night, the scattered papers, maps, and files barely visible beneath the cloud of thoughts swirling in his head. Isabella Marconi, the woman, who had always seemed like a mere shadow in her father's empire, was not just an accomplice. She was its architect. The pieces of the puzzle, which had seemed so far apart for so long, now clicked together with a terrifying clarity. Carmine Marconi had been the figurehead, the one people feared, but it was Isabella who had masterminded every move, from the distribution of illicit goods to the manipulation of politicians and law enforcement. She had used her father's name as a shield, a distraction, while she built a criminal empire that spanned every inch of the city. And now, she had outsmarted him. She had slipped through his fingers once again, pulling the strings behind the scenes and leaving Davis to clean up the mess. He ran his hands over his face, feeling the exhaustion settle in. The hours were slipping away, but sleep wouldn't come. Not with the weight of this new revelation pressing down on him. He needed to figure out his next move, and fast. Isabella had built her empire with careful precision, and she had already shown that she was always 10 steps ahead. Davis knew that if he didn't move quickly, he would lose her forever. The sound of a knock at the door broke his thoughts. He looked up to see Angela standing in the doorway, her face tense, her eyes scanning the room. "Davis, we need to talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Davis didn't bother to respond immediately. Instead, he grabbed the map from the table and spread it out between them, the red markings glowing under the dim light of the desk lamp. "I can't believe we missed this. Isabella's been pulling the strings all along. She's been running the show, and we've been too focused on her father." Angela's eyes narrowed as she examined the map. "Yeah, it's like she's been playing us the whole time." Davis slammed his fist onto the desk in frustration. "I've wasted months chasing after Carmine when it was Isabella who was the real threat. How did I miss that? How did no one see it?" Angela crossed her arms. "You weren't the only one fooled. We all were. Isabella has a way of staying out of the spotlight. She's been playing the long game, and we've been too focused on the obvious target." Davis leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "It's more than that. She's smart. She's calculated. Every move she's made has been designed to keep us off her trail. And now she's positioned herself in a place where she can't be touched." Angela's voice softened. "We can still take her down, Davis. It's not over." Davis looked up at her, his eyes hardening with resolve. "No, it's not over, but we have to move quickly. Isabella's playing a game no one's ever played before. We need to be smarter than her. We need to find a way to expose her without her seeing us coming." Angela nodded, stepping closer to the map. "We have to get to the core of her operation. We need proof, something concrete we can use against her. But we can't just rely on the same old methods. She's already proven she can avoid every trap we set." Davis thought for a moment, his mind clicking through the possibilities. "What if we hit her where it hurts? Take down one of her operations, one that's important to her. It might give us leverage." Angela raised an eyebrow. "You mean like cutting off her resources?" "Exactly," Davis said. "We need to show her that we can get to her, that she's not untouchable. We need to destabilize her empire, make her realize that no matter how carefully she's built it, there's always a way in. If we can do that, maybe she'll slip up. Maybe we can get the evidence we need to take her down." Angela hesitated for a moment, her gaze flicking over the map. "The warehouse district. It's where we found that map, right? Isabella's." got multiple fronts there, drug distribution, money laundering. If we could hit one of those, Davis's mind raced. If we could make a move on one of her major operations, it would send a message. But we have to be careful. Isabella's... No, fool. She'll know we're coming if we're not careful. Angela leaned over the map, her finger tracing the lines that connected the different points of interest. We've got a few options. We could go after her distribution routes, the ones that move product between locations, but that's risky. Or we could target the businesses that front her operations. If we can shut down one of her shell companies, it might disrupt everything. Davis's eyes flicked to one of the locations marked in red, a restaurant that had long been suspected of being a front for money laundering. That's our best bet, he said decisively. We'll hit her where it hurts, where she least expects it. The next morning, Davis and Angela gathered a small team of trusted officers to execute their plan. The operation was risky. Targeting one of Isabella's shell companies meant they would be going up against a highly protected front, but it was their best shot. The restaurant was busy during the day, with people coming and going, unaware that it was more than just a place to grab a bite to eat. But the deeper they dug, the more they uncovered about its role in Isabella's operation. Davis stood in the shadows outside the building, his heart pounding. The team was positioned, the plan set in motion. All that was left was to move in. This was their best chance, one last shot to expose Isabella's empire before she could bury it completely. Angela stood beside him, her eyes scanning the crowd. You ready? Davis nodded, his jaw set. Let's do this. With a signal, they moved in. The doors swung open and the team flooded in, catching everyone inside by surprise. The restaurant's employees scrambled, their expressions a mixture of fear and confusion. Isabella's carefully constructed illusion of control was about to crumble. Davis moved quickly, his mind sharp with focus. But as he glanced around, something in the back of his mind clicked. This wasn't going to be as easy as they thought. Isabella had planned for this. He could feel it. And as they rounded a corner, something caught his eye, a security camera that had been deliberately placed to capture every move. Davis's stomach dropped. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was a trap designed to lure them in. Isabella had known they would come for her. She had already turned the tables. The moment the security camera flashed red, Davis knew he had been set up. The feeling was immediate, his gut twisted in recognition that everything had gone wrong, that Isabella had anticipated this move, just like she'd anticipated every other one before. She was too clever, too strategic. Every plan he'd thought of to expose her seemed to have been preemptively countered, as if she'd seen it coming from the start. Inside the restaurant, chaos erupted as Davis and his team stormed through the entrance. The staff froze in terror, unsure whether to run or stay. Some moved to the back, others scrambled to grab their phones, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Davis signaled to his team, making a swift motion to split up and secure the exits. Angela was by his side, her face tense but determined. Check the back rooms, Davis said quickly, his voice low as he scanned the room. We need to find their records, their connections, anything that ties this place to Isabella's operations. Angela nodded, her eyes scanning the area, alert. As Davis turned to make his way deeper into the restaurant, his mind raced. Isabella had set this all up. This wasn't just a front for laundering money. It was a trap to draw them in, to make them think they were finally getting the upper hand. Davis! Angela called out from the hallway. He turned to see her at the entrance of a narrow corridor. Her expression was one of concern. You need to see this. Davis walked quickly toward her, dread creeping up his spine. He followed Angela down the hallway into a small office at the back. The room was barely furnished, just a desk cluttered with papers and a few filing cabinets. But what caught his attention was the large computer monitor on the desk, still lit and running. On the screen were rows of encrypted files, transaction logs, names and coded messages, documents that could expose Isabella's entire empire. His hand went to the keyboard, his fingers moving quickly to access the files. As the screen flickered, his eyes scanned the lists of names and locations. The deeper he dug into the documents, the more he realized how vast Isabella's network truly was. She wasn't just running the operations. She was orchestrating everything from the shadows, pulling strings with precision, but then something made him stop. There at the bottom of the list, a new file flashed across the screen. It was labeled simply, Backup Plans. His heart skipped. Fair beat. He clicked on it. The screen displayed a series of encrypted messages, each one a step in a contingency plan. It was clear now that Isabella had expected some sort of attack, some attempt to infiltrate her operations. These weren't just plans to keep the business running. They were strategies for how to deal with the authorities when they finally got close. It was as if she had already mapped out every move they might make, including this one. "We've been played," Davis muttered, his voice tight. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the screen. She knew we'd come here. She knew exactly what we'd find. Angela stood behind him, her face a mask of disbelief. "How is she? This prepared? How does she always stay 2 steps ahead?" Davis didn't answer right away. He had no easy explanation. Isabella's control over her empire had been subtle but all-encompassing. She wasn't just controlling people, she was controlling the very information they used to track her. She had built an infrastructure so sophisticated that even the smallest disruption could be anticipated and neutralized before it had any effect. "This doesn't make sense," Angela said, shaking her head. "How could she know everything we do? It's like she's inside our heads." Davis felt the weight of her words. Every step they had taken, every lead they had followed, had been anticipated. Isabella wasn't just controlling the criminal network, she was controlling their investigation. She had woven a web of deception so thick that it was nearly impossible to untangle. "We're playing checkers while she's playing chess," Davis said, standing up and looking at the computer once more. "She's too smart. We've been targeting the wrong things, the wrong people." The realization hit him like a brick. They had spent so much time chasing the obvious, the money laundering, the drug distribution, the warehouses. But Isabella's true power wasn't in those things. It was in her ability to manipulate and anticipate. She had made every attempt to break her down seem futile. The real operation was the one she controlled from the shadows, and it wasn't something they could touch by raiding a restaurant or busting a warehouse. It was a deeper, more insidious network that didn't rely on criminal transactions but on connections within law enforcement, within the political system, within every corner of the city. He turned to Angela. "We've been wasting our time. This isn't about criminal operations, it's about dismantling her influence, her network." Angela's eyes widened as she processed his words. "You're saying it's not just about the crime. It's about everything she's built. Her reach, her power, her ability to control everything." Davis nodded. "Exactly. We've been looking at the wrong part of the puzzle. Isabella isn't just running a crime syndicate. She's running a covert operation to control the entire city, and that's what we need to expose." There was a long silence between them, as both of them absorbed the weight of the situation. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath their feet. The task had gone from capturing a criminal to bringing down an entire structure of power that was far more entrenched than they had ever imagined. Davis turned back to the computer, scrolling through more of the files. "There's one thing we know now," he said, his voice hardening with resolve. "Isabella is playing the long game and she's built this empire to last. But we're not done yet. We just need to shift our approach." Angela nodded, her expression set. "How do we get to her then?" Davis's eyes flicked to the files, then back to her. "We go after her connections. We start dismantling the network from the inside out. We target her key allies, people she trusts. We expose them, and then we get to her." He looked at Angela, his eyes steady, filled with renewed purpose. "This war isn't over. We've just changed the battlefield." As the weight of his words settled in, Davis felt a sense of clarity. Isabella had underestimated him. He might have been 2 steps behind her before, but now the game had changed. She had always been in control. But now it was his turn to play the game on his terms, and he was ready to take the first move. Davis sat in his office late into the night, the dim light of his desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. Angela's words from earlier rang in his mind. "We go after her connections. We start dismantling the network from the inside out." The realization was simple yet overwhelming. Isabella wasn't just a criminal mastermind. She had embedded herself so deeply in the city's power structures that taking her down would require dismantling everything she had built. It wasn't just about catching her red-handed in a warehouse or a restaurant. It was about breaking down the foundation of her empire piece by piece. Davis was no longer chasing shadows. He wasn't hunting her father, Carmine Marconi, the figurehead. He wasn't looking at the low-level operations like drugs and money laundering. He was looking at the heart of Isabella's control, the web of influence that extended far beyond the streets. And that web was vast. He ran his fingers through his hair, staring at the map of the city on his wall. Red pins marked various points, places Isabella had touched: businesses, politicians, law enforcement, and anyone with power. Each one was a critical node in her sprawling network. Davis knew the truth now. If he could sever those connections, if he could expose the people who worked with her, maybe he could break the hold she had over the city. But where to start? The answer came to him in a flash. The next morning, Davis stood at the front of a briefing room. A map of the city sprawled out on the table in front of him. His team sat around him, looking at him expectantly. Angela stood to his left, her arms crossed, a silent show of support. Davis felt the weight of the moment. He wasn't just presenting a plan anymore. He was about to launch a targeted attack against Isabella's empire. "We're shifting our strategy," Davis began, his voice steady but intense. "We're not just looking for evidence anymore. We're going after the people who are helping her." Isabella Marconi's network is built on connections, people in positions of power who've helped her create a criminal empire that extends throughout the city. We're going to target those people. We're going to expose them. And in doing so, we'll weaken her control. A murmur of approval spread through the room. Angela nodded but said nothing, her focus sharp. She was a seasoned officer, and she understood the gravity of the operation. It was no longer a simple bust or a series of raids. This was a calculated dismantling of Isabella's entire operation. "We start with the political connections," Davis continued. "Isabella has been working with local politicians to protect her businesses and prevent any real investigation into her dealings. We've got one key target, Councilman James Webb. He's been on our radar for a while. The man has ties to every criminal operation in the city, and we know he's been feeding Isabella information. He's been shielding her from any real scrutiny. If we can flip him, we can expose her network." Angela looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any hesitation. She knew how dangerous it was to go after someone like Webb. A man with that much influence wasn't just a pawn in Isabella's game. He was a player. If Webb realized they were coming for him, he would move quickly. The stakes had just escalated. "I'll work with the surveillance team," Angela said, her voice calm but firm. "We'll track him, get the evidence we need." To force his hand. Davis nodded, his jaw set. "We need to get to him before Isabella realizes what we're doing. We can't afford to give her the chance to cover her tracks." The team began to organize, each officer assigned a specific task. Some would tail Webb, others would dig into his financial records, and a few would work on intercepting his communications. Davis and Angela worked through the finer details, preparing for the next phase. But in the back of Davis's mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that this would be the first real test of his plan, and they couldn't afford to fail. The following days were a blur of surveillance, paperwork, and meetings. Davis spent hours poring over Webb's financial records, searching for any shred of evidence that could link him directly to Isabella. Angela worked tirelessly with the surveillance team, tracking Webb's every move, documenting his interactions with known associates of Isabella. The pieces were starting to fall into place. On the third day, they caught their break. Davis and Angela were sitting in the operations room, staring at a live feed from the surveillance team. Webb had just left a high-end restaurant in the city's financial district, and he was meeting with someone Davis recognized, one of Isabella's trusted lieutenants. A quick glance at the timestamp on the footage told him everything he needed to know. Webb had just been handed a briefcase. A simple exchange, but it was enough. "That's it," Davis said, his voice low with intensity. "We've got him. The transaction is on tape." Angela leaned forward, her fingers tapping on the table. "This is what we need to connect Webb to Isabella. But we need to move fast. We can't give her time to clean this up." Davis nodded. "We move tonight. We bring Webb in. Once we've got him, we can start flipping him. If he's the key, he'll break, and when he does, Isabella's whole house of cards will start to fall. That night, Davis and his team staked out Webb's house, waiting for him to return. They had the evidence they needed, and now all that was left was to catch him in the act. The clock ticked down, every second feeling like an eternity. Davis stood in the shadows watching the front door, the tension in the air almost palpable. When Webb's car finally pulled up, Davis felt the adrenaline surge through his veins. The team moved quickly, surrounding the house, cutting off all exits. Davis's breath quickened and he nodded at Angela. It's showtime. They approached the front door, weapons ready. Webb had no idea they were coming. Davis could see the fear in his eyes as he was taken into custody. This was the moment that would break Isabella's hold on the city, or so they hoped. As they cuffed him and led him to the car, Davis couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This was a victory, but it was just the beginning. They were one step closer to Isabella, but he knew she wasn't going to go down without a fight. The game had officially begun, and Davis was determined to make the next move count. But Isabella's empire wasn't going to fall easily, and if she was as good as they all feared, the real battle had only just begun. The night air was thick with tension as Davis and Angela drove through the city streets, their minds racing with the weight of their latest move. They had brought Councilman Webb in. His arrest was a victory, but the deeper they dug into his connections, the more tangled the web became. Webb had been a key figure in Isabella Marconi's influence over the city, but Davis knew that cutting off one piece of the puzzle wouldn't bring her down. Isabella was a master at operating in the shadows, and she had more cards to play. As they approached the station, Davis couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something. Isabella's reach extended far beyond politicians and low-level criminals. She was smart, too smart. She had planned every move, and even though they had gotten a big win by flipping Webb, he couldn't help but wonder how much she knew, how far ahead she was. Angela seemed to read his thoughts. "We've got him," she said, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "Webb's going to crack. He'll tell us everything he knows. We've got the leverage we need to make him talk." Davis grunted in response, but the doubt still gnawed at him. He wanted to believe Angela's words, wanted to trust that this would be the breakthrough they needed. But something about this didn't feel right. They had seen Isabella slip through their fingers too many times before. Webb would spill everything, but Isabella was not the type to leave loose ends. She would already be preparing for what came. Next, when they arrived at the station, Webb was processed and led into an interrogation room. Davis and Angela wasted no time, walking into the room with a clear objective. Webb sat at the table, his hands cuffed in front of him. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced with the terror of knowing he had been caught. "Councilman Webb," Davis began, his voice calm but carrying an underlying force. "You've got a choice to make. You can help us, or you can spend the rest of your life behind bars. Either way, you're done." Webb swallowed hard, his gaze darting between Davis and Angela. He knew he was cornered. He had been an important player in Isabella's network, but now he was just another pawn in a game he couldn't control. His loyalty had been to power, and that power had evaporated in an instant. "I don't know anything," Webb stammered, his voice cracking. "I never meant to get caught up in this. Isabella, she told me everything was clean. I was just helping the city. She said I was doing the right thing." Davis leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "You're lying. You were a part of this. You've been funneling money and information for her for years. You've helped her hide her tracks, manipulate city officials, and block investigations. You're not innocent, Webb. You're just as guilty as she is." Webb's eyes flicked to the door, as if looking for an escape, but there was nowhere to run. Angela's voice cut through the silence, firm and demanding. "You've been working for Isabella this whole time. We know about the briefcase. We know you've been taking bribes. You've been in her pocket for years. Now you're going to tell us everything you know, every name, every deal, every single thing you've done for her." Webb trembled, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. For a moment, it seemed as though he was on the verge of cracking, and then, almost as if something clicked inside his head, he looked up at Davis and Angela with a resigned expression. "I can't," Webb whispered, his voice barely audible. She'll kill me." The word sent a chill through Davis's spine. He had seen fear before, but this was different. Webb wasn't just afraid of going to prison, he was afraid of Isabella herself. That fear, that realization, was the missing piece. Isabella didn't just control the city through her network of criminals and politicians. She controlled them through fear. They weren't just corrupt. They were terrified of what would happen to them if they crossed her. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," Angela said softly, her voice almost sympathetic. "We're going to protect you. But you have to help us. You have to give us the names. If you don't, you'll be right there with her in the prison cell, and that's the best-case scenario. Worst case, you won't live long enough to see the trial." Webb's face contorted in pain. He closed his eyes as if trying to block out the thought, but the terror of what Isabella might do to him was too great. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't tell you everything," Webb muttered. "But I can tell you this, she has people everywhere. Inside the police department, in the mayor's office. People who are willing to do anything for her. You can't touch her. You don't have the power to stop her." Davis leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Who's working for her? Who can we go after?" Webb shook his head slowly, the fear still etched deep in his features. "I don't know their names, but I know the people who are closest to her. She doesn't work alone. There are other players, higher-ups who keep everything in motion. But you'll never get to them. Isabella is untouchable, and if you keep pushing, you're going to regret it." Davis stood up, his anger boiling over. "I've been pushing for years, Webb. I'm not going to stop now. You're going to tell me what you know, or you'll regret it." Angela placed a hand on his arm, her eyes warning him to hold back. "Davis," she said quietly, "we're close. We don't need to push him too hard. He's scared. Let him talk." Davis took a deep breath, trying to control his temper. Webb was right about one thing. Isabella was playing a different game. But they were no longer going to be passive players. They had to change the rules. They had to strike harder, faster. "I need something, Webb," Davis said quietly. "Something that will give us leverage. You want protection? You want to stay alive? Then you help us take down Isabella. You have no other choice." For a moment, Webb just stared at him, his eyes hollow with fear. Then slowly he nodded. "I'll help, but you have to promise me you'll keep me safe." Davis didn't hesitate. "We'll keep you safe, but you have to tell us everything you know." As Webb began to speak, revealing what little he knew, Davis felt a surge of hope. They were getting closer. Isabella had her empire, but it was built on fear, and fear could be torn down. They weren't playing checkers anymore. This was chess, and Davis was finally starting to understand the moves. But as Webb revealed more about Isabella's influence, names, locations, contacts, Davis couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. Isabella had always been one step ahead. And though they were finally getting the pieces, he knew it was only a matter of time before she realized the game was changing. This was only the beginning. The tension in the air was palpable as Davis and Angela left the interrogation room, the door closing softly behind them. Webb's confession had been crucial, but it was only a small crack in the fortress that Isabella had built around herself. The names he had given them were like pieces of a broken mirror, shards of a larger, more dangerous picture, but at least they had a way in. They had the leverage they needed, and now it was time to act. Davis couldn't shake the feeling that they were in the final stages of a battle that had already been won by someone else. Isabella had always been too far ahead, too well prepared. The thought kept swirling in his mind. Was it too late? Had Isabella already covered her tracks, already planned for this? They were chipping away at her empire, but the walls were thick. What if this was just a game to her? A game where she controlled every move? Angela's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "We need to move quickly. Webb might be scared now, but he's still a politician. If Isabella's really got people in high places, it won't take much for him to pull back or even sabotage us." Davis turned toward her, his gaze hardening. "Then we don't give him the chance. We move on his information now, every lead, every person he's named. We take them down one by one. We don't wait." Angela nodded. "I'm on it. I'll get the team working on Webb's connections, his associates, the ones he's been working with. We need to hit them hard before Isabella has time to shore up her defenses." Davis watched as Angela headed off to coordinate the operation, but his mind remained focused on the bigger picture. Isabella was no ordinary criminal. She had built a network so deeply entrenched in the city's power structures that pulling Hit Apart wasn't just about taking down a few key players. It was about disassembling an empire. And with each person they arrested, each operation they disrupted, Davis knew the stakes would get higher. The more they exposed, the more Isabella would push back. The days following Webb's confession were a blur of activity. Davis and his team executed a series of raids based on the intel Webb had provided. Each arrest felt like another small victory, but with every name they pulled in, the shadow of Isabella grew darker. The more they disrupted, the more they realized just how deeply her influence ran. She wasn't just pulling strings behind the scenes, she was the puppet master of a much larger game. Angela had managed to track down one of the lieutenants Webb had named, a mid-level player in Isabella's operation. He had connections to several local businesses that acted as fronts for money laundering and drug distribution. Angela's team had been able to track him to a warehouse in the industrial part of the city. They moved in quickly, the element of surprise working in their favor. Davis had expected it to be another straightforward bust. But as the team breached the warehouse, he could see the look in Angela's eyes. Something was off. The warehouse was empty. "Where are they?" Angela muttered under her breath, scanning the surroundings. "This doesn't make sense." Davis clenched his jaw. He had known something wasn't right. Isabella had seen this coming. The lieutenants they were going after weren't just involved in illegal operations. They were part of the mechanism that allowed Isabella to stay one step ahead. She had let them take the bait, and now she was forcing them to chase their tails. "We're being played," Davis said under his breath, his voice hard. "She knew we'd come for this guy. She's covering her tracks, using him as a decoy." Angela looked up, her expression tight with frustration. "Then what the hell are we supposed to do now? We can't keep chasing ghosts." Davis's mind raced. He could feel the walls closing in. They were closing in on Isabella's empire, but it seemed like every time they found a lead, she pulled it out from under them. This wasn't just about catching criminals. It was about dismantling an entire system, and she had built that system to withstand attacks. But even in the face of frustration, Davis couldn't give up. He had come too far, risked too much. They were close. So close. "We need to shift tactics," Davis said, his voice cold with determination. "We go after the people closest to her, her inner circle. If we break them, we can finally get to Isabella. We don't chase the decoys anymore. We target the ones who know her plans, who are feeding her information." Angela's eyes narrowed, her mind catching up to the plan. "You mean we go straight for her top people? People who've been there since the beginning?" Davis nodded. "Exactly. We hit them hard. We make them realize that their loyalty to her isn't enough to protect them anymore. Once they crack, Isabella won't have anywhere to hide." The next few days were a blur of surveillance and intelligence gathering. They identified two key members of Isabella's inner circle, both of whom had deep connections to her operations. One was a former city prosecutor, who had once been known for her tough-on-crime stance, but had mysteriously softened when it came to Isabella's operations. The other was a former police officer who had been promoted to head of a small task force, one that had been tasked with investigating organized crime. In reality, he had been feeding Isabella information for years, allowing her to slip through their grasp. Davis and Angela knew that if they could flip these two, they could finally gain the leverage they needed. They weren't just informants. They were deeply embedded operatives who held the keys to everything. These two could expose Isabella's entire network. The team moved quickly, isolating the prosecutor first. They had her cornered, and she knew it. The question now was whether she would break or remain loyal to Isabella. Davis sat across from her in an interrogation room, his gaze steady, his voice calm. "We know everything," he began. "Your connections, your dealings, your protection of Isabella's empire. It's all here. You've been keeping her secrets for far too long, and now it's time to come clean." The prosecutor's face remained impassive, but Davis could see the flicker of fear in her eyes. He had her. "I'm not the one you should be looking at," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Isabella is untouchable. You have no idea what you're up against. Davis leaned forward. I know exactly what I'm up against, and you're going to help me take her down. You're going to give me everything you know. For a long moment there was silence. Then the prosecutor's shoulders slumped, and her eyes dropped to the table. She's got people everywhere. Inside the police, inside the city's legal system. She controls everything. But if you really want to take her down, you have to go after the ones she trusts the most. Davis felt a surge of hope. They were finally getting somewhere. The pieces were falling into place. But as the prosecutor began to divulge more names, the weight of Isabella's empire settled over him once again. This was a battle they were just beginning to fight, and they were playing a game where every move was crucial. They were closer than ever. But Isabella was still one step ahead. Davis stared at the files spread out across the table, the weight of the information pressing down on him. The prosecutor had broken. The floodgates had opened, and now they had the names, the connections, the links to Isabella's empire. It was all there, every crooked cop, every compromised politician, every dirty business deal. Isabella had surrounded herself with a fortress of loyal, fearful people, each one guarding her secrets and protecting her like a shield. But now, the cracks were showing. They had the tools to break that shield. But it wasn't enough to just have the names. They needed action. They needed to disrupt Isabella's operations in a way that would make her feel cornered. They needed her to react, to make a mistake. Angela, come here, Davis called out, his voice firm, but tinged with urgency. Angela stepped into the room, her expression one of quiet determination. Davis motioned to the documents on the table. We've got everything we need. It's time to hit her where it hurts. Angela nodded and stepped closer, her eyes scanning. The information. The prosecutor was more helpful than I expected. This is big. If we go after her inner circle, we could cut off the head of the snake. Davis rubbed his temples, thinking through the plan. Exactly. We target the people closest to her, her trusted lieutenants, the ones who've been running things from the shadows. If we get them to flip, we can dismantle her network from the inside. But we need to be careful, Angela cautioned. These people won't go down without a fight. And Isabella? She's not just a criminal, she's a strategist. If we make the wrong move, we could set her off and lose everything. Davis's jaw tightened. He knew Angela was right. They had to be smart about this. Every step had to be calculated. Every move precise. They couldn't afford to rush. But the stakes were too high to hesitate. Isabella had spent years building her empire. Now, it was time to bring it down. We hit them fast, hit them hard, Davis said, determination in his voice. We go after the ones who've been shielding her, those who've helped her maintain her control. We start with the ex-cop, the one who's been running her intel inside the police department. If we can get to him, we can take down the whole operation. Angela's eyes met his. And we make sure we take him down hard, no chances. Hours later, the team was assembled, ready for the operation. Davis stood at the front, his face set with resolve. The adrenaline in the room was palpable. This was it. The moment they'd been working toward for months. They had to move fast. Time was running out. Isabella had a network that spanned the city, and if they didn't act now, she could slip through their fingers yet again. We're going after Alan Porter, Davis began, referring to the former cop who had been feeding Isabella information from within the police department. He's the weak link. We've got his financials, his communications. He's been using his position to protect her, and now he's going to pay for it. Angela stood to the side, her arms crossed, as Davis continued outlining the plan. We hit him at home. We have the element of surprise. We're not giving him any chance to slip away. We take him down and we flip him. If he knows anything about Isabella's plans, now's the time to find out. The team nodded, all of them, ready for the action. The clock was ticking and Davis could feel the pressure mounting. The raids were carefully planned, but this wasn't just another bust. This was the turning point. They arrived at Porter's house just after sunset, the streets eerily quiet as they set up for the raid. Davis's heart raced as he watched the team move into position, each officer in place, each one ready for whatever came next. He knew the risk. He knew the stakes. If Isabella had gotten to Porter first, they might be walking into a trap. But they couldn't afford to hesitate. The moment Davis signaled, the team moved. They breached the door in a flurry of action, rushing into the house with precision. Davis and Angela led the charge, moving swiftly through the hallways. The place was silent, almost too quiet. Davis's instincts told him something wasn't right, but there was no turning back now. They found Porter in the back room, sitting at a desk, the glow of a computer screen casting a faint light across his face. His hands were trembling as he looked up at them, his eyes wide with panic. "Davis," he gasped, his voice hoarse with fear. "You don't know what you're doing. You don't know who you're messing with." Davis stepped forward, his voice cold and firm. "I know exactly who I'm messing with, Porter. Isabella's empire ends tonight." Porter's face twisted with a mixture of anger and fear. "You don't get it. You can't stop her. She's everywhere. She owns this city. And if you think you're going to take her down by arresting me, you're wrong. She's already 10 steps ahead of you." Davis's eyes narrowed. "Maybe she is. But I'm not here for you, Porter. I'm here to make sure you take her down with you." Porter's eyes darted to the door, as if he were looking for an escape, but there was nowhere to run. The door was blocked, the team was in position, and the trap had already been set. "Tell me what you know," Davis demanded, his voice rising with urgency. "Tell me everything about Isabella, her operations, her people, everything." Porter swallowed hard, his face a mask of defeat. "She has people everywhere. You won't get her. You think you have leverage, but you don't. She'll make... You pay for this, all of you." Angela moved forward, her expression unyielding. "You've already lost, Porter. Help us take her down, and maybe we can make things easier for you." For a long moment, Porter remained silent, his eyes darting between Davis and Angela. Finally, with a deep sigh, he slumped in his chair. "She's not just a criminal. She's built something bigger. People think she's untouchable. She's got a network, contacts in the government, the police, the courts. She's been planning this for years." Davis's heart raced as Porter spoke. This wasn't just about Isabella's criminal empire anymore. It was about something much larger. Isabella had embedded herself into the very fabric of the city. And they were only scratching the surface. "We need names," Davis said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Who's working for her? Who's protecting her?" Porter hesitated, his eyes flickering with fear. "You'll never get to her. But I'll tell you this. If you want to get close, you have to go after her most trusted people, her partners, the ones who've been with her from the beginning." Davis's mind raced as Porter listed off more names. Some were known, others were shadows in the background, but all of them were vital to Isabella's operation. This was the breakthrough they needed. With each name, each piece of the puzzle falling into place, Davis knew they were getting closer. But Isabella wasn't done yet. She would fight back, and she would do whatever it took to protect herself. Davis stood tall, his resolve hardening. "We're getting closer, Porter, but this isn't over. We're coming for her." As Porter was taken into custody, Davis couldn't help but feel the weight of what they had just uncovered. They were in a race against time. Isabella had been building this empire for years, and every move they made was one step closer to breaking it apart. But Isabella wasn't going down without a fight. The battle had just begun. Davis sat in his office, staring at the array of names and connections spread across the table before him. Each name was a thread in the intricate web that Isabella Marconi had spun over the years, and with every arrest, every piece of intel they uncovered, the threads were slowly being pulled apart. But he knew they weren't there yet. They hadn't even come close to fully unraveling her empire. The arrests of Webb and Porter had been victories, but Davis couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that Isabella was still steps ahead. She had orchestrated everything so carefully, made sure each part of her network was interconnected, so that even if one piece fell, it could easily be replaced. Her empire wasn't just built on power, it was built on staying out of sight, staying one step ahead of everyone who dared to challenge her. Angela's voice broke through his thoughts. "Oh, we've got a hit on her accountant. He's been laundering money through one of her shell companies for years. His name's Charlie Dunn. He's meeting someone at a hotel downtown tonight. We could use him to get to Isabella." Davis looked up, his mind already racing. The accountant, Dunn, was an unexpected but crucial piece. If he had been laundering money, that meant he had direct access to Isabella's finances, to everything she had been building under the radar. If they could get Dunn to talk, they could finally get the smoking gun they needed to break open her operations. "Get the team ready," Davis said, his voice low and determined. "We hit him tonight. We can't let this one slip away." Later. That evening, Davis stood in the shadows outside the upscale hotel watching the entrance. His heart raced with anticipation. This was it, the moment they had been building toward for months. They had followed the trail of Isabella's money, and now they were closing in on one of her key operatives. But Davis couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another piece of the puzzle, another small victory in a much larger game. Isabella was still out there, still controlling everything from the shadows. Angela walked up beside him, her expression focused, ready for the operation. "We have eyes on Dunn. He's in the lobby now, meeting with someone from his team." Davis nodded, his gaze fixed on the hotel. "We move fast. We need to get him alone and bring him in without any noise. We can't give Isabella a chance." To pull the strings from behind the scenes, the plan was simple. Surround Dunn, get him into custody, and break him before he had a chance to warn anyone. They had to strike quickly, before anyone knew they were coming. But something about this felt different. The tension in the air was thick, and Davis couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this might be their last chance to get to Isabella before she disappeared into the wind. Inside the hotel, Dunn sat at a corner table, sipping his drink as he chatted with an associate. He was unaware of the storm about to hit him. Davis watched from a distance, signaling to his team to move in. They had to act fast, and they had to be careful. Angela nodded to Davis and moved toward the front desk, her eyes scanning the area. The plan was unfolding as expected, until it wasn't. As Davis watched Dunn, something in the back of his mind clicked. It was too easy, too perfect. His instincts screamed at him. This isn't right. Davis's heart skipped a beat as he noticed the small security detail stationed at the hotel's exits. They weren't there for the hotel's guests. They were there for him and for Dunn. "Get down!" Davis shouted as the first gunshot rang out. The team scattered in an instant. Chaos erupted in the lobby as Davis dove behind a column for cover, his adrenaline surging. Angela was already on the move, taking out one of the gunmen with a clean shot, but the attackers were coordinated, and Davis knew they weren't just hired thugs. They were Isabella's people. This wasn't just an ambush, it was a message. "Davis, watch out!" Angela shouted, pulling him back behind the column as another round ricocheted off the marble floor. Davis's heart raced as he scanned the area, realizing that they were surrounded. This wasn't an ordinary hotel raid. Isabella had known they would come for Dunn, and she had prepared for it. They had walked into a trap. Dunn was gone. In the chaos of the gunfire, he had slipped away. Davis could feel his frustration building. Everything they had worked for, every piece of intel they had gathered, was crumbling in front of him. Isabella was always one step ahead. It was like she had known they would target Dunn all along. "Are you okay?" Angela's voice cut through the chaos. She had moved to a safer position, her gun raised, watching for any movement. "We need to get out of here. It's a setup. We're not going to get to him tonight." Davis cursed under his breath. "No, we're not done yet." The team had cleared the hotel lobby, but they were still in the dark. Isabella had played them again. Dunn had slipped through their fingers, and it was clear now that they were fighting an enemy who anticipated every move. But Davis wasn't about to let it end like this. "We don't leave until we get something," Davis said, his voice filled with raw determination. "This is the last chance. We've come too far to back down now." Angela's eyes met his, and for a moment, there was a shared understanding. She knew this wasn't just about Dunn anymore. This was about something bigger, the final confrontation with Isabella. Davis signaled to the team and they moved out, carefully checking each exit, each potential hiding spot. They had to find some clue, some shred of evidence that could lead them to Isabella. They couldn't afford to leave the hotel empty-handed. And then, just as they were about to give up, Angela spotted something. A small envelope tucked under a chair near the corner where Dunn had been sitting. Davis moved, quickly snatching it up. Inside was a set of coordinates and a message written in code. "The final move, be ready." His pulse quickened. This wasn't over. Isabella had just thrown down the gauntlet. "This is it," Davis muttered, holding the envelope out to Angela. "She's calling the shots now, but we've got the coordinates. This is our chance." Angela's eyes narrowed as she studied the message. "We've got one shot at this. If we go in, we're all in. No turning back." Davis stood tall, the weight of the moment settling in. "We don't turn back. We finish this." They had found Isabella's next move, and this time Davis was ready. The game had changed. The coordinates were set. Davis stared at the screen of his phone, the numbers burning into his mind. They had finally tracked Isabella Marconi to an abandoned industrial site on the edge of the city, one of her old properties, long thought to be defunct. But now it was clear she had returned to make her final stand. The coordinates were precise, too precise to be anything other than a trap, or the last move in a game that had been building for months. Angela stood beside him, her expression grim. "It's not over yet. She's expecting us." Davis nodded, his jaw tight. "We don't have a choice. We go in full force. We take her down now, or we lose everything." Their team had already been briefed and was moving into position. Officers were stationed at key points around the industrial site, surrounding the area without alerting Isabella's people to their presence. Davis had spent years working this case, watching as Isabella had slipped through his fingers time and time again. But this was it. If they didn't stop her now, her empire would be untouchable forever. Angela looked at him one last time before signaling to the team. "Let's move." The air was thick with tension as the team made their way toward the perimeter of the site. The ground beneath their boots was cracked and uneven, the abandoned structures looming like ghosts of a time long past. The smell of oil and rust filled the air, and the sound of distant machinery humming in the background gave the entire area an eerie, desolate feel. Davis's heart beat faster with every step. He had been in countless operations before, raids, arrests, standoffs, but this one felt different. They weren't just arresting a criminal, they were dismantling an empire. Isabella wasn't just a boss in the underworld, she had her fingers in everything, from law enforcement to politics to the very infrastructure of the city. This wasn't just about catching a criminal, it was about taking down the very system she had built. They reached the entrance of the industrial complex, a towering iron gate with a rusted padlock. Davis's team made quick work of it, silently cutting through the lock and sliding the gate, open just enough to slip through. The darkness inside the site seemed to swallow them whole, the only light coming from the occasional flicker of old street lamps casting long shadows on the walls. Davis led the way, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Every corner, every building. He couldn't afford to be distracted. He had to stay focused. Isabella was here, somewhere in this labyrinth of steel and concrete, surrounded by her people. She had played the game better than anyone. Now it was time for her to face the consequences. "We have movement," one of the officers whispered, into Davis's earpiece. Two men in front of the large warehouse armed. They're covering something. Davis held up his hand to signal the team to halt. The tension in the air was palpable, and the slightest mistake could blow their cover. He motioned for Angela to move to the left, while he took the right. They would split, flank the guards, and take them down silently. Angela moved swiftly, her steps barely making a sound on the gravel. She crouched low, her gun raised, and in a flash the two guards were neutralized, their weapons taken from them before they had a chance to react. Davis's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't allow himself to slow down. They had to keep moving. "Clear," Angela's voice came through the earpiece. "We've got two more on the other side of the warehouse, but it's wide open. Inside, no cover." Davis paused for a moment, considering their options. They could rush the warehouse, overwhelm the guards, and take control. Or they could lay low and wait, using the element of surprise to their advantage. "We rush them," Davis decided, his voice low and steady. "We take it now, no hesitation." The team surged forward, moving quickly and decisively. They breached the entrance of the warehouse, storming inside, weapons at the ready. The interior was vast, filled with old machinery, crates and boxes stacked haphazardly along the walls. The guards, expecting something smaller, were caught off guard, scrambling to reach their weapons. But it was too late. Within seconds, they were disarmed and restrained. Davis moved deeper into the warehouse, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the empty space. He knew they were getting closer. Isabella's presence was heavy in the air, like a storm on the horizon. The final confrontation was near, and this time there would be no escape. As they made their way through the maze of steel and crates, Davis caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. A large metal door at the far end of the building, slightly ajar. The faintest hint of light leaked through the gap, and Davis could hear voices, low, calm, calculating. "It's her," Angela whispered, her voice tight. "She's waiting for us." Davis nodded, his eyes narrowing. He motioned for the team to spread out, covering all angles. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Isabella was inside, and they weren't going to give her the chance to slip away. With a final nod, Davis pushed the door open, the hinges creaking as it swung wide. And there she was, Isabella Marconi, standing in the center of the room, her eyes cold, her posture relaxed. She wasn't surprised. She had known they would come. This had all been part of the plan. She was always one step ahead. "Well, well," Isabella said, her voice smooth, almost playful. "It's been a long time coming, hasn't it?" Davis's heart raced, his hand tightening around his weapon. "It ends tonight, Isabella." She smiled, but it wasn't a smile of fear. It was the smile of someone who had already won. "Do you really think you can stop me, Davis? You've been chasing shadows this whole time. This city is mine. It always has been." Davis stepped forward, his resolve hardening. "You've built your empire on fear and manipulation. But that ends now." Isabella's smile didn't falter. "You think you can take down everything I've built with a single raid? You're not the first to try, and you won't be the last." Davis met her gaze, his voice low and steady. "But I'll be the one to succeed." The air was thick with tension, the final confrontation hanging like a storm about to break. Isabella had played her game for years, but now the end was near. This wasn't just about stopping a criminal. It was about dismantling a system that had corrupted the very foundation of the city, and Davis wasn't going to let her win, not this time. "Move in," he shouted, signaling to his team. It was time to end this. The moment Davis called for the team to move in, everything shifted into motion. His heart pounded, the adrenaline surging through his veins. They had finally cornered Isabella Marconi, the mastermind behind it all, the one who had held the city in her iron grip for years. But Davis wasn't thinking about the accolades or the triumph of victory. All he could think about was that this moment could slip through their fingers just as it had before. Isabella had outplayed him every step of the way, but not this time. The air in the warehouse was thick with tension, each officer poised and ready. Angela was by his side, her gaze steady as she scanned the room. The rest of the team fanned out, silently taking their positions as they closed in on the warehouse's central area. Isabella stood there, unfazed by the storm that was about to hit her. "You've been through a lot to get here," Isabella said, with a calmness that only made her more dangerous. Her eyes locked onto Davis, and for a moment he saw nothing but cold calculation. "I'm impressed, really, but you don't understand what you're up against." Davis took a step forward, his grip tight around his weapon. "This ends tonight, Isabella. You're finished. This empire you've built, it's done." Isabella's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a smile of fear. It was a smile that said she had already won. "You think so? You've been chasing shadows for years, Davis. Every step you've taken, I've already seen it coming. The fact that you're here is the proof of how little you really know." The confidence in her voice sent a wave of frustration through him. He had spent years chasing this woman, trying to bring her empire down. Now that they were on the edge of victory, it felt as if the last step was the hardest. But Davis couldn't let her mind games throw him off. He had come this far, and he couldn't falter now. "I'm not here for games," Davis said, his voice sharp. "You're going to pay for what you've done to this city, to the people you've hurt. It ends tonight." Isabella's gaze softened, almost pitying. "I don't need to pay, Davis. You've already lost. Look around you. This is my city. My power is rooted deeper than you could ever imagine. You're not the first to think you could stop me. But they all failed. And so will you." Davis's jaw tightened. the weight of her words hitting him harder than he wanted to admit. She was right in one regard. She had played the game better than anyone. Her web of influence had touched every corner of the city. But Davis knew something she didn't. He had been studying her, watching her every move, and now, with all the pieces in place, he understood the final move in the game. Isabella Marconi's empire wasn't built on power alone. It was built on fear, on control. But fear was a fragile thing, and Davis was about to break it. "We'll see about that," Davis said, his eyes narrowing. He signaled to Angela, who was already positioning herself to flank Isabella from the side. The team moved into position, weapons raised, closing in on her. This was it. No more games. Isabella's smile faltered slightly, but she didn't move. "You think you've won, but the truth is, you're just a pawn in this game. You've always been one. I never needed to be in the spotlight because I knew how to manipulate it. And now you're walking straight into my trap." Davis froze, a chill running through him. Her words sent a cold shiver down his spine. A trap? His instincts flared. Was this another one of her elaborate schemes? Was it really that easy? He glanced quickly at Angela, who gave him a sharp nod. She was as skeptical as he was, but they had no choice but to push forward. "Not this time, Isabella," Davis said firmly, forcing any doubts from his mind. He couldn't afford to second-guess himself now. Without warning, Isabella made a swift movement, and the entire atmosphere seemed to shift. She wasn't backing down, she was preparing for something. But it wasn't a weapon. It was something far more dangerous. She stepped forward, her voice lowering, now filled with cold finality. "For you think you figured it all out, that you know who I am. But you've misunderstood one thing, Davis. It's never been about the money. It's never been about the empire. It's about control. And I've always had control. You've come this far only to see that your victory was never yours to take. You're not in charge here." Before Davis could react, he saw it, a subtle shift in the shadows. More men had entered, positioned at key spots, their faces half hidden, waiting. Isabella wasn't alone. She had been prepared for this moment. Her backup was already in place. Davis cursed under his breath, realizing how badly he had underestimated her once again. But this wasn't over. Not yet. "Get down," Angela shouted just as a series of gunshots erupted, tearing through the air, shattering the stillness. The team dove for cover, returning fire as chaos erupted around them. The ambush had begun. Davis's pulse spiked as bullets ricocheted off steel beams, the sound deafening in his ears. Isabella had turned the tables, using their approach to trap them. She had known they would come for her, and now they were caught, in a firefight with armed men who had been stationed all around them. Davis gritted his teeth, adrenaline flooding his system. The battle raged, each team member returning fire as they moved to a safer position. But Davis's mind was focused on Isabella. She was still in the center of the chaos, calm, poised, still playing her hand. "Angela, move!" Davis shouted, pulling her back to the cover of a nearby crate. "We're not leaving until we have..." "Her?" Angela's eyes were wide, but she nodded, determination hardening in her expression. They were trapped, but this wasn't over. They couldn't let Isabella escape again. As the firefight continued, Davis's thoughts raced. How do we stop her? How do we end this? Then it came to him. Isabella was the center of the operation. If they could take her down, the rest would crumble. The team just needed to get to her before her reinforcements could do any more damage. Davis motioned to his team, signaling them to move in on Isabella's position. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. The pressure was mounting, but they had no choice. This was the moment. He glanced once more at Angela, who gave him a silent nod, ready to make the move. Together, they rushed forward, dodging bullets and returning fire. The final act was about to unfold. This time, Isabella wouldn't escape.